In the Democratic Republic of Congo, the three leading opposition candidates in last month's presidential election say they won't file legal challenges to the vote. Martin Fayulu, Denis Mukwege, and Moise Katumbi have all said they do not trust the Constitutional Court, which would hear the case. The National Election Commission on Sunday declared incumbent President Felix Tshisekedi the provisional winner with 73% of the vote. All three candidates and several other opposition contenders have called the vote fraudulent. It was marred by problems that forced the Election Commission to extend voting beyond the constitutional election date of December 20th. The opposition leaders and some civil society groups are demanding a rerun due to extensive logistical problems that they said undermined the balloting. Paul Nantulia, a research associate at the African Center for Strategic Studies, explains to VOA senior analyst Mohamed Al-Shenawi the reasons why many are rejecting the election results.
The refusal by the opposition parties and members of civil society, and indeed the wider Congolese public, to accept these results has a strong basis in material fact. As far as a year before the elections, early warning signs were pointing to the country going through precisely what it's going through today. There were complaints about the composition and independence of the Constitutional Court. The 9 judges on this court, and this is a very important court because it handles election disputes, are all supporters, associates close to Tshisekedi himself, all the 9 judges. This was a major complaint that civil society organizations flagged on many occasions, but it was not addressed. So there's very little trust and confidence that that court will handle those disputes properly and impartially. Secondly, the National Electoral Commission, which is the other very important institution in the Congo, its composition, according to Congolese law, must at all times include representatives from opposition parties, from civil society, in addition to the ruling party. That law was not respected, and so the entire structure of this commission is subservient to the executive, including the commission chief, Denis Kadima. So going into these elections, there was very, very little confidence that that would be seen as valid and representative of the wishes of the vast Congolese population would be respected.
So, Paul, that was a thorough description of what preceded the elections. How about the irregularities claimed by both the opposition and some civil society organizations in DRC?
Then we go into the malpractices and the well-documented cases of massive fraud. And these have been highlighted by the Bishops' Conference, the SENCO, the Joint Protestant Catholic Mission, which deployed over 60,000 poll observers. It's the largest observer mission on the ground right now. And they've been producing daily reports. And those reports have shown that upwards of 40, sometimes even higher than 50% of the polling process was fraudulent, missing ballots, ballots that were pre-ticked, ballots that were blank, especially in cases of in government-controlled areas, massive instances of faulty machines, registration of minors. The registration itself, the voter register, which the National Election Commission has so far refused to publish, is riddled with problems. And there had been calls as far back as 6 months ago by the churches, by civil society, for an independent audit of the election register, because the massive cases of fraud, misconduct, and administrative chaos throughout those 75,000 polling stations in the country were almost identical to the problems that beset the country during the voter registration exercise. Some of those registration centers were set up in military academies. Same thing happened in the election. You had registration of minors, especially in government-controlled areas. This was the same thing that happened in the election. You had blank ballots distributed in government-controlled areas. So the blotched registration process that ran from December to April was a clear indicator that Congo was heading for the chaos that we have seen. Voting that continued for 5 days after the constitutionally stipulated date of December 20th. The church leaders, the bishops, have called on the Election Commission to account for those unconstitutional extensions. Where were they? How did it affect the results? What were the results of those polling stations that opened unconstitutionally for all those days? How many many people voted, and so on. These are questions. And that's the reason why the bishops have questioned the validity of these results across numerous polling stations and have suggested that the widespread irregularities and fraud and sheer chaos that has taken place in the country will affect the outcome, regardless of what that outcome might be. They have not indicated who actually won this election, but what they've said, and what I think would be very, very important to take into consideration, is that regardless of that outcome, this is a process that fell way below Congolese standards and which is basically has put the country in a position, which is a very dangerous position, where it is not known for certain whether the results being presented by Seni in all these different areas actually reflect what happened in this particular election.
That was Paul Nantulia, a research associate at the African Center for Strategic Studies, speaking with VOA senior analyst Mohamed Al-Shanawi. Chad's military leader has appointed the former opposition leader and pro-democracy figure, Success Masra, as prime minister in a new transitional government. Opposition and civil society groups are skeptical that Masra, who recently returned from exile, can convince military ruler Mahamat Idris Deby to give up power. But Masra says his appointment does not stop him from making sure Chad carries out elections later this year and returns to civilian rule. Moki Edwin Kinzika reports from neighboring Cameroon.
Ministère des Affaires étrangères et des Tchadiens de l'étranger, Ambassadeur Mohamed Saleh Al-Nadif.
Mahamat Ahmad Al-Habo, Secretary General of Chad's presidency and a close aide of military ruler General Mahamat Idris Deby, reads the names of members of a new government. Al-Habo says the new government, who he says will prepare Chad for return to civilian rule, was named after consultation with former opposition leader Success Masra, whom Deby appointed as Chad's transitional prime minister on Monday. Masra replaced Saleh Kebzabo, a Deby appointment, who served as prime minister for 14 months. On Sunday, Deby said he had accepted Kebzabo's resignation following the adoption of a new constitution. Last week, Chad's Supreme Court approved the results of a referendum in which 85% of Chadians voted in favor of the new document. Nyotabi Bibi Valentin is president of the N'Djamena headquartered African Party for Peace and Justice.
Je ne vois pas vraiment Masra lui-même former un gouvernement de ce genre.
He says he does not believe Mahamat Idris Deby consulted with Masra before naming and installing a new government of 41 members on Tuesday. Netabi says before the new prime minister and his government were appointed, civil society and the political opposition, including Masra, asked Deby to reduce Chad's governments of transition by half. Netabi said a majority of the members of the transitional government appointed by Deby are the military generals, family and friends. Chad's civil society groups say Masra and a few former opposition members in the new government will not be able to stop the military ruler from illegally continuing his family's autocratic rule. Deby's father, Idris Deby Itno, ruled Chad for 3 decades before dying in April 2021 on the front lines of a fight against northern rebels. The younger Deby was to head a transitional council, but on October 8, 2022, he dissolved the council and declared himself interim president. Masra led thousands of civilians in street protests against what he called Deby's iron-fisted rule and his attempts to continue his father's dynasty. Rights groups report that security forces killed 50 people, injured 300, and arrested several hundred during the protests. Masra fled to the United States through neighboring Cameroon, but returned on November 3 after he reached an agreement with Deby. Civil society groups say they were surprised when Masra started urging voters to take part in the constitutional referendum, which opposition groups called a sham to extend Deby's rule. Chad's opposition says by accepting the prime minister's post, Masra has dashed the hopes of a majority of civilians who counted on his popularity to force the military junta to step aside. Masra says his appointment does not stop him from pressing for democratic elections for a return to constitutional order.
La première des choses que nous espérons pouvoir faire.
He says his immediate task is to convince teachers who have been refusing to work since October 2023 in protest of difficult working conditions and poor salaries. He says teachers should return to classrooms and work while he prepares a national dialogue with teachers because children's education is a fundamental human right and charts government priority. Masra said he will make sure living conditions of civilians are improved and the current fuel shortage is eased before the country holds elections in October of this year. The 40-year-old former opposition leader also says he will work closely with Deby to make sure the general amnesty granted to all civilians and military arrested during the October 2022 protest is fully implemented. Moki Edwin Kinzika, VOA News, Yaoundé, Cameroon.
The South African National Defence Force has swiftly distanced itself from alarming statements made by a former commander, Sylvester Mangolele, who recently surfaced in a video circulating widely on social media. In the video, Mr. Mangolele explicitly called for the removal of President Cyril Ramaphosa from office, setting a tight ultimatum of 48 hours for the president to step down or face forcefully eviction. The former officer justified his command by appointing the alleged constitutional violations commitment by President Ramaphosa. The video, which gained traction on Tuesday, has stirred considerable concern and speculation across the nation. In response to this development, the SANDF has taken a clear stance, emphasizing its non-involvement in political matters and disavowing any connection to the ex-commander's call for presidential removal. However, in a statement on Tuesday, the army distanced itself from Mr. Mangolele's comments, saying that he does not speak on behalf of SANDF. The SANDF condemns Sylvester Mangolele's utterances with the contempt it deserves, said SANDF spokesperson Sifiwe Dlamini. Mr. Mangolele was dismissed from the Defense Force in 2018, the army said, without clarifying why he was sacked.